All right, friends and neighbors, we're going to start reading The Veldt by Ray Bradbury together. And a couple things I want to point out is I have I'm in my son's iPad. My sci-fi notes handy, right? Got to have those handy whenever I'm annotating. Back to the story here. So a couple things I want to point out about the Veldt that are different from other stories that we've read in the past. The first is that there isn't really a dystopian protagonist to speak of. One could possibly make the argument that the parents or the father could maybe roughly be considered a dystopian protagonist. But for our purposes, we're not even really going to look for that. And if you notice in the annotation instructions, right, it says annotate for the characteristics of the dystopian setting, the essential question, and foreshadowing. So the other interesting or unusual consideration in reading the Veldt is that when we look at the characteristics for a dystopian setting, we're really looking at the intimate setting of the house. We're not looking at some kind of oppressive government or society at large, although we could probably draw some conclusions about the society at large. We're really looking at a household. And so the household itself is the setting. So with that, I'm going to start reading and annotating, and then you'll finish the rest on your own. The good news is, because this is a longer story, I'm going to give you 2 days to read and annotate, as opposed to having to finish it today, Tuesday. All right, so The Veldt by Ray Bradbury. It was first published in 1950 under the title The World the Children Made. In the 1950s, American homes were becoming more mechanized with such modern conveniences as dishwashers, refrigerators, washing machines, TVs, etc., leading to the fear that people would become spoiled and overly reliant on these technologies. This fear is directly reflected in the Veldt. So again, we're going to annotate for the characteristics of a dystopian setting, which is the house, and we're going to note the specific characteristic in the margin. We're going to look for that essential question, which is always the same. What is Bradbury trying to reveal about our own world in creating this dystopia? And last, we're going to do foreshadowing. What clues does Bradbury provide to give an impression of what's going to happen later in the story? Now, at this point, you might want to pause and go and watch my very short 1-minute video, which is a quick review of foreshadowing. If you've already done so, you can just keep going. All right, so here we go. Oh, by the way, there is also provided for you an audio of Stephen Colbert reading. He's famous if you know him. Reading the story in front of a live audience. It's actually a great recording. So once you're done with this partial recording of the story, you might want to read and annotate with Stephen Colbert. All right. George, I wish you'd look at the nursery. What's wrong with it? I don't know. Well then, I just want you to look at it, is all, or call a psychologist in to look at it. What would a psychologist want with a nursery? You know very well what he'd want. His wife paused in the middle of the kitchen and watched the stove busy humming to itself, making supper for 4. It's just that the nursery is different now than it was. All right, let's have a look. They walked down the hall of their soundproofed Happy Life home, which had cost them $30,000 installed. This house, which clothed and fed and rocked them to sleep and played and sang and was good to them. Their approach sensitized a switch somewhere, and the nursery light flicked on when they came within 10 feet of it. Similarly, behind them, in the halls, lights went on and off as they left them with a soft automaticity. I'm going to pause here. So I don't really know exactly what's dystopian at this point, except to say I'm noting some interesting things about the setting, right? It's fully automated. If you notice, it's very technologically advanced, right? So I'm going to pause for a moment and think about what the advantages and disadvantages might be to living in an automated house. So an advantage might be, convenience, right? Not having to do menial tasks like turning on lights and whatnot. Now, what is a disadvantage? Well, gosh, if a person can't even turn on and off their own lights, perhaps they're getting a little overly reliant. People don't have to work, which to me is a disadvantage, because everybody should know how to work through problems, right? They don't need to work through anything. The house is cooking for them and turning on lights on and off, right? There's a point at which it becomes a problem. All right. Continuing on. Well, said George Hadley, they stood on the thatched floor of the nursery. It was 40 feet across by 40 feet long and 30 feet high. It had cost half again as much as the rest of the house. But nothing's too good for our children, George had said. The nursery was silent. It was empty as a jungle glade at hot high noon. The walls were blank and two-dimensional. Now, as George and Lydia Hadley stood in the center of the room, the walls began to purr and recede into crystalline distance, it seemed, and presently an African Veldt appeared in 3 dimensions on all sides in color, reproduced to the final pebble and bit of straw. The ceiling above them had become a deep sky with a hot yellow sun. George Hadley felt the perspiration start on his brow. Let's get out of this sun, he said. This is a little too real, but I don't see anything wrong. All right, so now I'm going to pause for a second. This is a little too real. Let's get out of this hot sun, but I don't see anything wrong. All of that kind of struck me as, the room, the nursery, is, what's the word I'm looking for? Seems to have sort of a hostile environment, right? Overly hot. And, he can feel and sense all of the hot sun beating down on him, and he's uncomfortable. But then he says, but I don't see anything wrong. To me, that looks like foreshadowing, right? I mean, anytime anybody says anything like that, you know something is wrong, right? Wait a moment, you'll see, said his wife. Now the hidden odorophonics were beginning to blow a wind of odor at the 2 people in the middle of the baked Veltland. The hot straw smell of lion grass, the cool green smell of the hidden waterhole, the great rusty smell of the animals, the smell of dust like red paprika in the hot air. And now the sounds, the thump of distant antelope feet on grassy sod, the paper rustling of vultures. A shadow passed through the sky. The shadow flickered on George Hadley's upturned, sweating face. So again, I'm going to look at all of this and I'm going to say all of this imagery, right? It just seems too real, almost intimidatingly real. Filthy creatures, he heard his wife say. The vultures. You see, there are the lions far over that way. Now they're on their way to the water hole. They've just been eating, said Lydia. I don't know what. Some animal, George Hadley put his hand up to shield off the burning light from his squinted eyes. A zebra or a baby giraffe, maybe. Are you sure? His wife sounded peculiarly tense. No, it's a little late to be sure, he said, amused. Nothing over there that I can see but a cleaned bone and the vultures dropping for what's left. Do you hear that scream? She asked. No. About a minute ago? Sorry, no. I'm going to pause again here. There's a scream, and the are you sure, and that she sounds very tense. So again, to me, that strikes me as possible foreshadowing, which I'm now just going to abbreviate as FS, just for my own speed, right? The lions were coming, And again, George Hadley was filled with admiration for the mechanical genius that had conceived this room. A miracle of efficiency, selling for an absurdly low price. Every home should have one. Oh, occasionally they frightened you with their clinical accuracy. They startled you, gave you a twinge, but most of the time, what fun for everyone. Not only your own son and daughter, but for yourself, when you felt like a quick jaunt to a foreign land, a quick change of scenery. Well, here it was. So again, I'm going to pause here because now I'm starting to see, if I go back to my notes, one of the things that we learn or that we note, right, is the idea that a concept can be worshipped. And it certainly seems to me that George, right, when he refers to this as a miracle of efficiency for an absurdly low price, right? And even though occasionally they frightened you with their clinical accuracy, what fun for everyone. Not only your son and daughter, but for yourself, right? If you wanted to go someplace fun and interesting, you could just hop into this nursery. And this strikes me as they're sort of worshiping these technologies, right? Which is a concept, right? This idea that technological advancements are great and worth, spending all your money on is somehow kind of a concept that is being worshipped. So I'm going to stop there and let you all finish the rest. And just a quick reminder that this is due tomorrow, not today. And when I say tomorrow, I mean Wednesday, not today, Tuesday. So hopefully this is helpful.